The year is 1977, and a 17-year-old is driving along the road near the small town of Dover, Massachusetts. It's around 15 miles southwest of Boston and has a population of less than 5,000 people, spread over an area of around 40 square kilometers. And while it might be a fairly innocuous town, by at least most metrics, illuminated in the headlights of his car, the occupants are about to have an encounter that, at least for some, will put Dover on the map for good. Something appears out of the gloom, perched on a broken stone wall, something with glowing orange eyes. Little other discernible facial features exist, and a strange, slender finger that is used to grip onto the wall is seen. The driver would report what he had seen, and this first sighting would result in a spat of similar incidents, each one just as confounding and confusing as the last. Incidents that would cause a fair amount of intrigue, suspicion, and an investigation that would be launched from that seemingly random day all the way to the present. All of them sightings of the creature that came to be known as the Dover Demon. As with every cryptid we look into, to get a full sense of the story, it's always going to feel the most fair to start with the background of the area and then go over the first-hand accounts to analyze what they actually think they saw. And this one is no different. Surprise, surprise. Something bizarre had appeared in this otherwise unremarkable town, and it would soon grow into something more than a local legend. Something that would pop up for a number of people in a short space of time. One where there are many different accounts with some shared facts and some key differences, which kind of highlights a bit of an issue, but anyhow, by all accounts, they appear to be in some way to be far too uniform and too closely matched to be anything less than truthful. And the debate still continues to this day over exactly what was seen over the course of those 2 days in 1977, with no certain conclusion in sight. So to get to the bottom of this story of the Dover Demon, we're headed to Massachusetts to find out what it's all about and why their beers are always overpriced. The first report, briefly outlined in the introduction, comes from the courtesy of Bill Bartlett. He was driving with 2 passengers on the 21st of April 1977 when they came across the creature for the first time. They were on Farm Street, one of the main access points to the town, when they spotted the creature up on the wall. In addition to the description provided above, he also described it as having a head that seemed too large for the rest of the body, and it was oddly shaped, like a watermelon. Its skin color was tan, and it lacked any form of body hair. It was estimated to be somewhere around 4 feet tall by Bill Bartlett standards, and he would provide a sketch of the creature, as best he could remember it, where it was an overall appearance that seemed very closely matching, at least how people would describe it in specific accounts later, to be basically aliens. He would be adamant that his description of both the events and what he had seen were accurate, despite how unlikely it might have seemed to others at the time. And to this end, he endorsed the sketch that he provided with the following text. I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw this creature. The head in the sketch is largely skull-shaped and seems to taper down from the eyes with no clearly visible nose or mouth. And despite the fact that there was already one fairly thorough description of an initial sighting, it would take only an hour or two for a second similar account to come through, which is always a little strange because that means people were seeing something. Was it somebody in a furry suit or a scaly? God knows. Honestly, I'd prefer the aliens. A pair of boys named Pete Mitchell and John Baxter, aged 13 and 15 respectively, would report that they encountered the same creature not far from the first location. This time, it was said to be walking upright on 2 legs and was running away from them when they spotted it, disappearing from sight not long after they saw it. The overall physical description matched the initial sighting very closely, with all of the major features being repeated. And the very next day, a third sighting would be reported, and this time by Abby Brabham and Will Trainter, who were aged 15 and 18. The pair were driving in Will's car when they spotted a similar sounding creature out of the window by the side of the road, and again, the overall physical description was closely aligned with the previous 2, but with one notable difference where this time the creature was said to have green glowing eyes rather than the orange ones they had previously reported. Over the course of these sightings, several of the witnesses would provide hand-drawn sketches alongside their descriptions and explain in great detail exactly what they both saw to their parents and then to the authorities. And the authorities would then start looking into what was almost certainly the most bizarre case that they had ever come across in recent times. They either had a spat of spoof sightings on their hands, all these people just got together like, hey, we're gonna screw with everybody, which who knows, could be a possibility, or they were dealing with something that seemed far too bizarre to be real, or aliens in general are pretty bizarre and kind of we don't really know how to understand them, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, I'm just gonna break in for a second. Things like this, the biggest strange part about it, I guess, is when you actually see something that is weird, your brain works triple overtime just to understand it because it doesn't know what it's really seeing. I remember the first time I saw a string of SpaceX satellites in the sky. I was coming back from actually a YouTuber event. Well, I call it a YouTuber event. I basically just met up with a bunch of YouTubers and they were on Power Tour at the time. So it was in McDonough, Georgia. Anyways, you got to go past, the racetrack over there. So I was in the middle of nowhere and I saw all these satellites and I was like, brother, what is that? And anyway, so the point is that I was just looking at it and my brain, I remember thinking to myself, like, what am I really looking at? Like, my brain didn't know because I'd never seen a line of lights like that just up in the sky all at once. I see satellites, but this was weird. So your brain starts trying to figure out what it's seeing and that can cause some issues. So if you ever see an alien, probably a similar issue. Your brain is going to be working triple overtime to figure it out, and it's just not a good time. Also, this could just be a bear that had mange, but we'll get there. So, when it came to identifying whatever was at the source of these sightings, there were some who kind of jumped immediately to things beyond our current understanding. Many who have an established interest in UFOs and cryptozoology have pointed out some of the physical features described by all the witnesses appear to track with a number of suspected other cryptids or unknown creatures. One that tracks very closely indeed, at least physically, is the Mimigwaisi, which you may not think that's how you pronounce it, but I looked it up this time because I think I was successfully bullied into learning how to pronounce things because people are like, dude, if you're gonna make a video, learn how to pronounce it. First off, it's kind of a good point. So moving on. This is a species that is said to exist primarily in the lore and mythology of the Cree people in Canada. In their tradition, the Mimigwaisi make their homes around rocks and rapids and are hell-bent on creating mischief and misfortune for the people around them. They are especially renowned for deliberately capsizing canoes and are known to be tricksters of any and all sorts. Ah, what a little scamp, drowning people. So they are described as being shorter than most humans and have heads that are proportionally larger than their bodies, as well as prominent eyes and no noticeable nose. In addition, they are said to have long, slender fingers, a total of 6 on each hand. The number of physical similarities have led some to believe that the Dover demon is an example of one of these creatures. In particular, they note that the head shape and size, along with a fairly consistent description of the Dover demon lacking any other distinct facial features other than its eyes. Whether this is accurate or not, it's really up to each individual to decide, but regardless of where you stand on it, there is no denying that there are plenty of things in common between them. Others have compared the Dover demon to many reports from all over and multiple decades of one of these suspected or purported alien types known as the Greys. While they have also been referred to regularly as Zeta Reticulans or Roswell Greys, they are surprisingly common in retellings and encounters by people that claim they have interacted with aliens. In fact, the Greys are pretty much, okay, so there's two types of, I guess, thought processes with the Greys. Now, the thing is if you believe in aliens or not, I mean, the universe is a pretty big place, so even if life is just random chance, the fact is that those chances can exist even just within our own galaxy to be replicated once more. The big thing with the Greys, though, is some say the Greys are just interested in humanity, like scientifically. Others say the Greys actually directly interact to stop us from destroying ourselves, such as with nuclear weapons, how everybody in the 1950s was super nuke happy, and then Roswell happened, and then we all became less nuke happy. I know, like, the whole concept of the Cold War exists, obviously, but clearly we didn't nuke each other into oblivion. So some say there's interference there. Some say it's divine intervention that stopped things from happening like that. But the point is that typically the depictions of aliens, it's interesting that across all ethnicities in different areas of the planet, you do kind of have a representation of the Greys and what humans have interacted with in the past. But there are specific bodily traits, not just concerning the Greys, but the Dover demon in particular, is they seem to track over multiple independent accounts. Their main characteristic, other than just the pale gray skin that gives them their name, is their short stature, being shorter than the average human. Despite this, they retain many of the same body elements and composition, albeit slightly exaggerated. They are generally described as slim or slender, with long limbs and elongated fingers, which are strikingly similar to how the demon was described. They also sport large heads, described by many as both bulbous and disproportionately large compared to the rest of their bodies, which was another feature reported in the demon. Many other features track. They are hairless, they have prominent eyes, and much less pronounced additional facial features, although their eyes are generally said to be dark or black rather than having a bright color or glow to them as described in the Dover. Also, one of the other conspiracy theories is that the Greys evolved on Earth prior, and they're just like coming back now, like, oh, hey, look, others. So, I mean, it's like, you know, us looking at orangutans, right? It's like, oh, those are cool. Like, what are they doing over there? Let's study them. literally what's going on, if it is happening at all. But this leads some to believe that what these witnesses in Dover encountered was at least one or possibly several aliens that had crash landed somewhere in the area and were spotted in the process of leaving the area, and that's kind of what everybody saw. Again, this theory is open to discussion and it's up to you how much merit you choose to give it. And while we are looking at other encounters or creatures that seem to share similar similarities, wow, similar similarities you say, or features with a Dover demon, why is this? Anyways, it's worth drawing a quick comparison to the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, also known as the Kelly Greenmen. This was an encounter in 1955 where a group of 12, consisting of both adults and children, reported that they had been attacked in their home by aliens from a spaceship and had engaged with them in a gunfight, which is baller. So while the full story is better covered in a video of its own, which we should be doing in the future, the key part of this story is how these beings were described. They were between 12 to 15 in numbers, and they were roughly about 3 feet tall and said to have glowing yellow eyes. Add in the fact that their limbs were long and spindly and mentions of their claw-like hands, it is fair to say that there is certainly something that appears to at least overlap between these two sets of creatures. However, as always, there are a number of more rational explanations that have been offered by observers who are naturally more skeptical when it comes to all things supernatural. One of the most common, and probably the one that crops up the most when it comes to reports of cryptids, is that it was nothing more than a misidentified animal in the description. Despite the fact that these physical descriptions offered by all the teenagers differing fairly notably from any sort of known animal, some have suggested that it could be anything from a foal to a coyote to even an owl. Much like one of the most accepted conventional explanations for the Flatwoods Monster, which was an owl, the main factor in this identification seems to be the description of the demon's eyes as being large and growing. Two effects that could arguably be seen in the owl, especially if it was illuminated by a vehicle's headlights. One that ties in with the claims is that it was either bipedal or walking on 4 limbs. That's not really fully understood. Others lean more towards the idea that it was the young of a common local creature, like a moose calf or a foal. While this might go some way to explaining the size and dimensions of what was seen, again, it comes up against the problem of most of these witnesses being local. You would imagine that they were familiar with any of the local wildlife and would be able to correctly identify something that was anywhere near the ordinary realm of thinking for the area. Of course, something to also take into consideration is I lived in the Southeast, still do, live in the Southeast pretty much my whole life. There are still animals out here that I've seen from time to time, and I'm like, what is that? So how knowledgeable is the common person when it comes to animals in the area? That always remains to be seen. So there's always the possibility that while the demon was in fact a normal animal of some sort, it could have been suffering from some defect or deformity that made it appear vastly different than what could be expected. Again, there are issues with this, as there were no reports of unusual or malformed remains or in or like around this area at the time, or even shortly after the fact. But how possible is it that there could have just been a simple initial misidentification by witnesses who weren't expecting to see anything at all, far less something so far out of the ordinary, and especially if the animal was hurt or frightened? How would that be likely to color both its appearance and its behavior? A local police officer suggested that even something like a raccoon with mange could have matched enough of the physical characteristics to explain the sightings. Part of this explanation also contains an element that is fairly common when it comes to the more skeptical analysis of cryptid encounters: the first factors of stress and surprise, as well as subtle psychological influence. For the initial encounter, there is no doubt that almost anyone coming across something unexpected or unusual would experience some kind of response that sent their pulse and their mind racing. Look at me with the SpaceX satellites. It has been pointed out that under these circumstances, we are not as good as we might think we are at accurately observing or recalling what we saw. And the best way to figure out if you suck at that is just go ahead and witness something stressful and then try to recall it as best you can. Not easy. And this is how this impacts what we think we saw. The fact that if we were to encounter something that was otherworldly, there is every chance that our minds and bodies would immediately default to a panic state where the priority is fight or flight, and all of our more secondary functions are less keen than usual. It has been pointed out that since the initial spat of sightings, that if you were to connect them all, I suppose, it would form an almost straight line through the area, and this would certainly appear to track with whatever the Dover demon was really doing, and possibly it was moving along a specific route and then was spotted by various people at these different points in times. However, it's also been suggested by those that favor more rational explanations that there could be an element of almost a copycat to the various sightings. That word spread around the nature of the details of the first instance, and this ended up coloring the perception of others who also had encounters shortly afterwards. That they had the image in their heads of what was initially seen, and it affected how they saw whatever it was and then what they saw after. And there is always the possibility that the entire series of incidents amounted to nothing more than a prank or a hoax on some level. Suggestions that center around this idea point out to the relatively young ages of the witnesses, so they're lying. I don't know. Or at least it kind of raises the possibility that it could have all just been made up entirely by one or all of them. It might have been a complete fabrication by all of them together, or the subsequent sightings were just kids following on from the biggest news item that had come out of the town. So as with all theories and other explanations, this one has its own issues. After all, it's really hard to see exactly what any of these witnesses truly gained out of what they saw, and maybe you just sound crazy. And all of them were adamant that their descriptions were accurate, refusing to alter or amend them in any way, even when pressed by investigating authorities. Some might point to the slight discrepancies in a way that the creature's physical appearance or movement were described as indications that these witnesses were unreliable. But it's actually easier to argue that these small differences make their accounts a little more plausible. Despite being viewed as one of the strongest and most reliable forms of witness testimony, it has been proven time and time again that the average person simply isn't wired or equipped to recall or report prior events with any significant level of accuracy, because our brains are made of fat and meat. Those things can be influenced. In fact, having something as ultimately insignificant as a different color of eyes reported by two different people doesn't undermine the reliability of these accounts. It almost makes them more likely to be true reflections of what the individuals saw or truly believe they did. Also, it's important to understand though, when you're talking about eye color, you have a tapetum lucidum, or some people call it tapetum lucidum. It's basically when you look at a cat's eyes in light, it's what reflects back. The interesting part about this is that changes color depending on where the eyes are sitting. So sometimes my cat has, it's yellow, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's ultramarine. You know, it's all these different colors because the light is hitting it at a different angle. So if people are reporting different colored eyes, that just indicates that it's a tapetum lucidum, which means it could be, crepuscular, which means basically it hunts at night or like evening or early morning, or it could truly be nocturnal. And then just the way the light hits it makes the eyes appear to be a different color. So what is the most plausible explanation for the Dover demon? And what is the most likely reason for this, at least all these sightings that seem to spring up in one rather localized area overnight, continue for a few days, and then largely die off after that? The solution, as always, is whichever theory or explanation makes the most sense to you personally, because there's really no possible way to know 100% because we weren't there. So if you choose to believe that there were alien sightings confirmed by multiple independent witnesses and recorded for future reference, then there certainly are some pieces of evidence to back this idea. Equally, there is no denying that even the most hardened skeptic concerning the Dover demon does sound very much like the Memegwashi. Where this would fall down is whether you believe in either the creature. I mean, you might not, because after all, one thing you don't think exists being similar to a second that you also don't believe in really doesn't give anybody any type of, stance on thinking it exists at all. And in amongst the more rational or at least practical suggestions, there is always the one that is common across almost all cryptid sightings. Is it possible that these sightings were just made up? That it was nothing more than a prank or a hoax orchestrated by bored, relatively young kids. After all, once the first sighting happens, it does seem common that others follow in their footsteps. For those that tend to believe in these sightings, this is just proof that whatever they are discussing is real. The fact that it has been seen multiple times by multiple people, though, kind of lends credence to this. For others, it seems more like a mild case of mass hysteria, of an idea being lodged into someone's brain by the recent news about something completely off the wall and out of the ordinary, and it's either coloring their own relatively pedestrian encounters or leading them to fabricate them entirely. For what it's worth, the prank or hoax theory doesn't seem to really hold a huge amount of weight though. There was little to be gained by any of those who reported it, and to the extent to which their reports matched is fairly uncanny, especially given that these reports were not released officially at the time, so anybody who saw it had to basically work off what they just saw, and it can't really be affected, as much by other people's perception. But that isn't to say that the word wouldn't have gotten out through other means though, just by word of mouth. It is much more likely than not that these encounters were one of the biggest news items in the town at that point, and it would be fair to assume that almost everyone had heard about it in some way, shape, or form, maybe just not the specific details that were reported. Despite the sightings essentially disappearing after the initial encounters, it did little to curb the enthusiasm of those to hold a strong interest in all these things cryptid-related to continue to believe this. Over the years, people have come from far and wide to visit Dover, waiting to find out more about the famous demon or to buy the merchandise that sells some commemorating nonsense about one of the town's most famous residents. And it's a pretty good way to make money. It always gets brought up in these videos. It's like, yeah, it's weird how small towns always tend to have a cryptid or something happen because it pumps money into the town. So there you have it, the story of the Dover Demon and the strange encounters that people have had with it over a strangely tumultuous short spell almost 50 years ago. Let us know what you think is the best explanation for this. Is it cryptid, alien, or just an animal? Something misidentified by a panic observer, or a harmless prank that grew arms and legs? Let us know if there's any similar cryptids that might be worth covering, or suggest something totally different that you want to watch a video on. But before moving on to the end of this, I would like to say, what do I think it is? Now, the problem is, if you take life from another world, right, and you have a taptum lucidum, I mean, it's totally possible that something would have that. Now, you may not understand what the function of a taptum lucidum is. Essentially, it gives light a second chance to pass through the retina by reflecting it back through. This would typically indicate that an animal that is hunting in low light environments will need this. The problem is not every animal has a taptum lucidum, but a lot of animals can get mange. So if you had something sitting on a wall that has a taptum lucidum, I mean, the raccoon theory holds a lot of weight. They have weird little fingers, they're small. It could have just been a big raccoon with mange. It also, well, let's see, I don't know if bears have a taptum lucidum. Let's find out. As confirmed, bears do have a taptum lucidum, and if you take a black bear, which the black bears are known to be in the Northeast, and let's say it's a relatively young black bear with mange, if it's sitting on a wall or like climbing a wall and it looks at you, the eyes will reflect back in a certain way, which makes it look weird, and then it just leaves the area. Also, the fact that no weird remains were ever found, or like an indicator that that was the issue, means that if that bear died at some point, it's just gonna be a dead bear. It's not gonna be anything crazy. So could it be that it was the Greys? It's always a possibility. I mean, who knows? I personally have never seen one of the Greys, so I can't say they exist. But what we can say exists are skin conditions, the animals that are down here with us, and taptum lucidums, that when you shine a light at it in a certain angle, it is gonna change the way that reflects, and so it's gonna change the coloring, which could be reported. Now, obviously, the facial features being, different. I guess if a bear is looking directly at you, it may have a bigger nose, but it's not really gonna, it seems like it's gonna taper, right? So it could be really a multitude of these things. But anyhow, I wanna hear what you guys think. Do you think it was an alien? Do you think it was a bear with a skin condition that needs to, I don't know, be dipped in mange bath? Or do you think it's something else? Let me know down in the not the description. You guys can't make anything in the description, but you can leave me a comment. Hopefully a friendly comment. This channel is not very friendly. I've noticed people wilding out in the comments, but it doesn't matter. I appreciate you guys watching all the same, even if you're not happy that I'm making things. So, but speaking of being happy though, I do want to say thank you to my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, the Michigan Dog Man, which I have to go fist fight in 2027, Monkey Man, Not a Pickle, and Stupid Fox. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. At the First Hand Accounts tier, we have Pimp Daddy Shamrock and Yeeps. And at the Second Hand Accounts tier, we have Bianca, Fred Rush, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out. Thank you. You guys are ballers. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.